Hello, and welcome to the turbulent world with me, James M. Dorsey, as your host. Syrian rebel leader Ahmed al-Sharaa, aka Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, appears to be a man who picks his battles. Speaking at a Damascus mosque, Mr. al-Jolani, a one-time jihadist with a history as an al-Qaeda and Islamic State operative, and a $10 million US bounty on his head, suggested Syrians were exhausted, focused on reconstructing their war-ravaged country, and unprepared for another war. This country is moving towards development and reconstruction. It's going towards stability. People are exhausted from war, so the country isn't ready for another one, and it's not going to get into another one, Mr. al-Jolani said. Days later, Syrian state media quoted Mr. al-Jolani as saying, "We are not in the process of engaging in a conflict with Israel," adding that there are no excuses for any foreign intervention in Syria now that the Iranians have left. Mr. al-Jolani's problem is that Syria may be tired of war after 14 years of fighting, but war may not be tired of Syria. The stakes are high for Mr. al-Jolani, his rebel group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and Syria. Mr. al-Jolani needs to be seen as building an inclusive Syria that has ruptured the country's ties to militancy, whether it's Mr. al-Assad's alliance with Iran and the Islamic Republic's non-state partners, Sunni Muslim radicalism, or Hayat Tahrir's jihadist past. The pitfalls are multiple. The pitfalls include rivalries among a kaleidoscope of rebel groups, some of which are supported by external powers, including Turkey, the United States, Israel, Jordan, and Russia. Turkey's occupation of Syrian territory in the north of the country, the status of the Kurds in regions close to the Turkish border, and potential sectarian violence because of revenge killings. Foreign ministers of 8 Arab countries, Turkey and the United States, alongside the European Union's foreign policy chief and the United Nations Special Envoy for Syria, called this weekend for a peaceful and inclusive political transition in Syria that leads towards elections and a new constitution. In a separate statement, the Arab ministers also condemned Israel's incursion into the buffer zone with Syria, its airstrikes in Syria, and demanded the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Syrian territory, including the Golan Heights, conquered by Israel during the 1967 Middle East War. Turkish Defense Minister Yasar Gula sought to preempt calls for a withdrawal of Turkish troops from northern Syria by offering to discuss the issue when necessary conditions arise. Syrian exiles suggested that calls for revenge were fueled by the fact that most of Mr. al-Assad's senior associates and security operatives vanished into thin air as the opening of the former president's prisons laid bare the horrors of his rule. Mr. al-Assad's brother Maher, the commander of the military elite's 4th Armored Division, was reportedly one of the few to follow him to Russia after flying a helicopter to Iraq. Mr. al-Assad's associates and henchmen just disappeared. They still have their weapons. They still have a considerable amount of financial resources. The former regime is invisible, but it's not gone, warned Syrian activist Labib al-Nahas. Meanwhile, Syria's new rulers, in a bid to reassure Israel and garner Western favor, ordered Hamas operatives in Syria and other militant Palestinian groups to limit themselves to political activities and not launch attacks on Israel from Syrian territory. The United States, backed by Israel, is likely to demand that Syria expel the Palestinians, as well as other Iran-aligned militants. The Hayat Tahrir gesture and Mr. al-Jolani's rejection of conflict with Israel came as Israel attacked Syrian military infrastructure in what one security official described as one of the largest attack operations in the history of the Israeli Air Force. Israel said it had destroyed 80% of its Syrian counterpart in hundreds of sorties in the past week. On Friday, explosions of Israeli ordnance pockmarked mass celebrations of Mr. al-Assad's fall in the streets of Damascus and other Syrian cities. Middle East analyst Ehud Yari noted that Israel had long supported commanders of some of the 25 rebel groups in southern Syria. Some of those commanders regularly met Israeli officials in the Israeli city of Tiberias and other places. Many villages in this region have benefited from Israel's Good Neighborhood operation, which provided humanitarian aid on a large scale, and many fighters were treated in a field hospital established especially for them on the Israeli side of the border, Mr. Yari said. Commanders who fought Mr. al-Jolani, Hayat Tahrir, and the group's jihadist predecessor, Jabhat al-Nusra, during the civil war, and last week participated in the rebel takeover of Damascus, including those backed by Israel, met in recent days with their former nemesis to discuss cooperation. Similarly, Mr. al-Jolani warmly welcomed Turkish intelligence chief Ibrahim Kalin during his visit to Damascus this week. A video posted on social media suggested the rebel leader personally drove his Turkish visitor around the city. Turkey's long-standing relations with Hayat Tahrir will likely complicate Mr. al-Jolani's inevitable efforts to restore sovereignty over all Syrian territory. Yet, his efforts to secure international support hinges in part on managing his relations with Turkey as well as Israel. Were the incoming government to challenge Israel's aggression amidst the latter's heightened security concerns, the likely result would be an immediate decline in Hayat Tahrir's political and military viability, said international relations scholar Nahal Abdallah. To rub it in, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insisted that the Golan Heights would remain Israeli for eternity. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump recognized Israel's 1981 annexation of the mountainous region during his first term in office. That could put Mr. al-Jolani at odds with Mr. Trump, as the Syrian leader seeks to restore government control over all of Syria. Mr. al-Jolani's potential predicament creates opportunities for Iran as well as Russia, Mr. al-Assad's other main backer. Iran and Russia may bet on potential strife in Syria to salvage what can be salvaged, including Russia's military bases in Syria. Given Iran's proven ability to exploit regional chaos, Syria's transition could present new opportunities for influence. The emerging power vacuum and tensions between various factions, particularly Kurdish Turkish animosity, might create openings for a different kind of Iranian influence, said Iran nuclear policy scholar Nicole Grayevsky. Middle East security scholar Michael Knights noted that the al-Assad regime's fall does not mean its former patron, Iran, will simply give up on using Syria as a corridor for reconstituting Hezbollah next door in Lebanon. Quite the opposite. Iranian arms smuggling has historically thrived in collapsed or weak state environments. Similarly, a Russian diplomat suggested that a lot can happen in Syria. The events there may be just the beginning. There is a colorful coalition with different factions. Some of these groups maintain close ties with Moscow, so there is still a field of play for Russia. So far, Mr. al-Jolani has been conspicuously quiet, about the future of Russia's military bases. Instead, Hayat Tahrir responded to a Russian bombing of rebel positions before Mr. al-Assad's fall by calling on Moscow to side with the Syrian people. We affirm that the Syrian people seek to build positive relations based on mutual respect and common interests with all countries of the world, including Russia, which we consider a potential partner in building a bright future for a free Syria, Hayat Tahrir said. Mr. al-Jolani said the rebels had feared resistance from Mr. al-Assad's military and his supporters, Iran and Hezbollah, the Iran-backed Lebanese Shiite Muslim militia. Their removal is the solution for Syria. The current situation won't allow for a return to panic, Mr. al-Jolani said. In response, General Hossein Salami, the commander-in-chief of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, or IRGC, conceded that we have to live with the realities of Syria. We look at them and act based on them. Strategies must change according to the circumstances. We cannot solve numerous global and regional issues with stagnation and employing the same tactic. At the same time, the IRGC accused the United States and Israel of exploiting instability in Syria and warned that it would not be passive in confronting any plan or scheme that seeks to disrupt the resistance and weaken the power and authority of the countries in the region. The IRGC was referring to what remains of the Axis of Resistance, an alliance of Iran-backed militant non-state actors after the fall of Mr. al-Assad and Israel's weakening of Hezbollah in the recent Lebanon war. Earlier, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei asserted that the United States and Israel had planned Mr. al-Assad's overthrow. Mr. Khamenei hinted at Turkey having also played a role in the alleged conspiracy. The loss of Syria and Hezbollah has crippled Iran's forward defense strategy that centered on Mr. al-Assad and the Lebanese militia, serving as deterrents by virtue of their presence on Israel's borders. It forces Iran to rethink its defense strategy and regional policies. As a result, it's hardly surprising that Hezbollah described Mr. al-Assad's overthrow as a major, dangerous, and new transformation. The Hezbollah statement contrasted starkly with the congratulations heaped on Hayat Tahrir by Sunni Muslim Islamist groups. Military analyst Elia Magnier said Israel's assault on Syrian military facilities involved taking out Hezbollah weapon stockpiles moved to Syria in the early days of the 14-month-old Gaza war to shield them from Israeli attack in Lebanon. Mr. Magnier said Mr. al-Assad had facilitated Hezbollah's weakening by preventing the group from firing its Syria-based heavy weaponry toward Israel in the vain hope that the gesture would position him as a bulwark against Islamists and jihadists. Mr. al-Assad used restrictions to convince Arab states and the international community that I'm on the side of the conflict. I'm not interfering, Mr. Magnier said. Mr. al-Assad's ploy did not pay off. Even so, to reconstruct Syria, Mr. al-Jolani needs his government to garner international recognition and to ensure the United Nations takes Hayat Tahrir off its designated terrorism list. This week, the rebels' transition government thanked Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Italy, Jordan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia for resuming their diplomatic activities in Damascus. Meanwhile, Turkey was the first to reopen its embassy in the Syrian capital after closing it down 12 years ago. The diplomatic move served Mr. al-Jolani's most immediate goal of persuading the United States and the United Nations to lift economic sanctions and give him the benefit of the doubt. 50% of government receipts before the civil war came from oil and gas. Today, Syria has no oil and gas industry, and what small amount is being produced is under the control of the Americans. The first thing this government is going to have to do is ask for that back, ask for sanctions to be lifted, said Syria scholar Joshua Landis. The rebels said this week they had taken control of the small Al-Taim oil field in Deir ez-Zor, which produces 5,000 barrels per day. Geert Pedersen, the UN Special Envoy for Syria, said Hayat Tahrir could be removed from the UN terrorism list if it formed a truly inclusive transition government. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said U.S. officials had echoed a similar sentiment in direct contacts with Hayat Tahrir. This means we need orderly, inclusive arrangements, ensuring the broadest possible representation of Syrian society and parties. If this is not happening, we risk new conflict in Syria, Mr. Pedersen said. My message is Syria cannot be run like Idlib, Mr. Pedersen added, referring to Hayat Tahrir's governance of its erstwhile stronghold in northern Syria. In a statement 2 days later, Hayat Tahrir said it would hold fighters accountable for violating orders, including a ban on demands that women dress modestly and the obligation to protect public and private property, respect public institutions, and treat former Syrian military personnel properly. That didn't stop Mr. al-Jolani from asking a woman to cover her hair in his presence in a video that circulated on social media. In Idlib, Hayat Tahrir respected religious minorities' rights, establishing a directorate of minority affairs within its technocratic Salvation government, but did not grant them representation in the region's legislature. So, while they might not be harassed, their needs might not be met, or at least not as efficiently as those of the majority Sunni community, said Islamic militancy scholar Aaron Zelin. Mohammed al-Bashir, the rebel-appointed interim prime minister, has yet to publicly name many members of his cabinet, but minority representatives already complain that they are not represented. What we have seen now is the new temporary government they have established. It is only from their own people and Hayat Tahrir, no one from the minorities, no Kurds, no Syriacs, no Christians. This is not a good sign, said Kurdish activist Sinem Sherkani Mohammed. Mrs. Mohammed and representatives of other minorities expect to derive leverage from the fact that Mr. al-Jolani will be more attentive to their demands because Syria will be competing for international attention and resources with Gaza, Ukraine, Lebanon, Sudan, and other flashpoints in dire need. Mrs. Mohammed is the U.S. representative of the Syrian Democratic Council, SDC, in the United States, the political wing of the predominantly Kurdish US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, in northern Syria. The SDF provided the ground troops in the US-led fight that deprived the Islamic State of its territorial base in chunks of Syria and Iraq. The SDF manages detention camps and prisons holding thousands of men, women, and children affiliated with the Islamic State. Balancing Turkey and the Syrian Kurds may prove to be one of Mr. al-Jolani's foremost challenges. In Aleppo, Hayat Tahrir sought before Mr. al-Assad's fall to reassure the SDF that the Islamists had no beef with the Kurds. SDF fighters were allowed to leave Aleppo with their weapons for Kurdish areas in the north. Hayat Tahrir needs the SDF to keep a lid on the Islamic State by maintaining the camps in which the thousands of the group's associates are detained. That could change If President-elect Trump takes Turkey up on its offer to take over the management of the detention camps and remains on the sidelines when Turkey acts on its vow in the wake of Mr. al-Assad's fall to eliminate the People's Defense Units, YPG, the Syrian Defense Forces backbone. Turkey views the YPG as the Syrian arm of the outlawed Kurdish Workers' Party, or PKK, that has waged a more than 4-decade-long low-intensity insurgency in Turkey in which more than 40,000 people were killed. Turkey has long demanded that the United States drop its support for the Syrian Defense Forces, withdraw some 900 U.S. troops from northern Syria, and task the Turkish military with confronting the Islamic State. The Turkish Foreign Ministry thought to appease the U.S., saying after talks in Ankara between Mr. Blinken and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan that Turkey prioritized preventing terrorism from gaining ground in Syria and preventing Islamic State and the PKK from dominating there. In recent days, Turkey's proxy in northern Syria, the Syrian National Army, SNA, forced the Syrian Defense Forces out of 2 cities in the region, Tal Rifat and Manbij, and is targeting the town of Kobani. There will be no ceasefire until every PKK fighter is completely removed from Syrian territory. Our mission is to eradicate terrorism on Syrian soil, vowed Saif Polat, an SNA commander in Manbij, in an Al Jazeera interview. In response, the SDF warned this week that it would have to halt its efforts to contain the Islamic State if the SNA attacks continue. Even so, Turkish author and scholar Mustafa Akyol sees a silver lining in developments related to the Kurds. One thing good has happened in Turkey. Lately, Turkey has been giving signals of reconciliation with the PKK in Turkey. If the region is lucky, if Turkey softens its tone inside Turkey vis-à-vis reconciliation and a peace process, and if the SDF, the Kurdish forces in Syria, keep giving conciliatory messages, we could be on the right path, Mr. Akyol said. Thank you for joining me today. Thousands across the globe are avid readers and listeners of the turbulent world. Join them in helping maintain and expand the column and podcast by becoming a paid subscriber. Paid subscribers have access to the full archive, exclusive posts and polling, can leave comments, join debates, and know they're supporting independent writing, reporting, and analysis that lets the chips fall where they fall. You can contribute by going to jamesmdorsey.substack.com and choosing one of the subscription options. Thank you for your support and loyalty. Take care and best wishes.